ناكم في الأرض وجعلنا لكم فيها معايش قليلا ما تشكرون آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our fifth discussion in our series looking at Islam and the environment, and responding to the world's most urgent environmental report. In our first discussion, we looked at the reasons for our existence. In our second discussion, we explored the verses of the Quran which tell us that the entirety of existence responds to our behaviors, both good and bad. In our third discussion, we questioned how have we gotten here such that the scientific consensus is telling us that our planet is on the verge of becoming, at least in part, uninhabitable between now and the next 100 years. That we are not just over-consuming, but also the extent of the pollution and the destruction that we are yielding and wielding upon the planet has come to a point, or rather has come to a tipping point, and something urgently must be done. Yesterday, we started a very important discussion, which we build on this evening, inshallah. Yesterday, we introduced the idea of something called a maqasid al-sharia, that the sharia itself actually has certain goals, certain values that it seeks to protect. And we mentioned that there are general maqasid and there are specific maqasid. General maqasid are generally the things in all elements of life that the sharia wishes to protect. The sharia wishes to protect mine and your life. The sharia wishes to be able to protect mine and your religious faith. The sharia needs to be able to protect mine and your wealth. But there are always specific sharia that respond to certain subjects, to certain themes. For example, we would say, what are those subjects? What are those themes that respond, for example, to matters in regards to politics and policy, or for example to economy, or for example to healthcare? In the discussion that we had in regards to environmental protections, the Quran brings forward a number of verses, and Ahlelbayt alayhimus salam provided a number of ahadith regarding those elements of the environment and the ecology that need to be protected in our planetary system. For example, we spoke about the protection of mountains. They are stabilizers. Rivers and oceans, for they and trees clean out the things that need to be cleansed from the earth and reoxygenate. We also have the systems of rain that flush out the uncleanliness, and so these things need to be protected. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, for example, in the Quran, وَأَلْقَى فِي الْأَرْضِ رَوَاسِيَ أَن تَمِيدَ بِكُمْ وَأَنْهَارًا وَسُبُلًا لَعَلَّكُمْ تَهْتَدُونَ. Allah has placed mountains firm on the earth, lest the earth sway and shake. And Allah has placed rivers and paths so that you may find your way. All of these things in the natural order need to be protected. We mentioned that this idea of the mountains being a means of stability for the earth, this is something which has been proved scientifically, that mountains cause stability on the planet. In this respect, their roots are joined together like strong armor. They protect the earth against the pressures originated from the inner heat of the belly of the earth. If they were not there, the destructive earthquakes would be so abundant that man might not be able to live above surface. And in this respect, this strong cover of the earth resists against the gravity of the moon and that the sun, in a way that the mountains did not exist, a great tide would come into being over the ground that would not, unlike the ebb and flow of the sea, could make it impossible for man to live on earth. We can see here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that the system of creation is there to protect human life, and that if we actually destroy those things which are sustaining human life, then of course human life can no longer continue to exist in normalcy or comfort. The emphasis here in the verse that we spoke about, the Quran says that there are rawasi, which is the plural of rasiya, which means that which is constant, stationary, sustaining. And ultimately, these things are pillars of human life. We also mentioned that our sixth Imam Jaffer Ladak, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, is narrated to have said, life cannot be pleasant without three things: clean air, abundant fresh water, and fertile land. If these things are destroyed, then human life would become unbearably hard for us, and it is not permissible for us to put ourselves into unbearable hardship. Now, what is important for us to move into tonight's discussion is that when we speak about the maqasid, we mention that the maqasid is at the top and the fiqh sits underneath, which means that the fiqh is governed by the maqasid and not the other way around. The interpretation of the law has to respect the maqasid and has to be able to be in line with the maqasid. If any ruling is given which is not in harmony with the maqasid al-sharia, then we know truly that that ruling, that law, is not actually from the system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, these sit above the law, making sure the law is in accordance with the highest goals of the sharia and protects those things in life which the sharia wishes to protect. Individual laws cannot conflict and must always be pursuant to the maqasid. It might be that you and I refer to the environmental maqasid al-sharia as something along the lines of Islamic rights for the planetary system. Just like we have human rights, just like we have animal rights. What are the rights of the planet on us? The maqasid al-sharia might be a reflection of Islamic rights for the planet. Now, what we're going to be doing tonight, inshallah, is we are going to introduce three principles in Islamic law, in fiqh, that challenge the way in which we are understanding these maqasid al-sharia and challenge the way in which we are living. And the idea tonight, in my humble opinion, tonight's discussion is the most important discussion in the entirety of the series. And the reason for that is because it will grant us an insight into the way the Maraja al-Kiram, the Mujtahiddeen, may Allah protect them all, have to be able to navigate this issue of environmental protection. And so what we're going to do is present three principles that will, when we look at them, challenge many of the scientific issues that we are seeing with the ways in which we're actually living and the way in which the Sharia and the Islam that we are living actually would respond to the urgent challenges that we have. The three discussions we're going to have is on the following. One is called Isalat al-Ibaha, the principle of general permissibility, the idea that everything in this planet is available for us to be able to use and to consume for the benefit of the human being. We'll explain this in some detail in a minute. The second principle we're going to go into is what is known as La Dharar wa La Dhirar, no harm, no harming. Islam does not allow, does not occasion for harm, meaning I cannot harm you, and you cannot harm me. Well, what happens when harm comes about from the things that we are doing in the planet? And the third is going to be what's known as the principle, the qaida of aham versus muhim. That which is important versus that which is most important. What happens when these two things clash? Which we'll come to again in this discussion, inshaAllah. Now, tonight's discussion, as I said, is the most important because it is going to lead us in to the way in which we go into a very contemporary discourse on Islam and environmental protections. All tonight is going to be is explorative. I'm going to introduce to you these three fiqhi principles and explore them in terms of the maqasid al-sharia, explore them in terms of the scientific consensus about the destruction of the planet that is at the hands of human beings, and how fuqaha, scholars, may have to navigate some of the challenges, and where they would then take resource from being able to make contemporary fatawa or contemporary ahkam and contemporary guidance for us in this issue of environmental protections. So the first thing we need to discuss is the concept of isalat al-bara'a or isalat al-ibaha. Isalat al-ibaha is a principle of general permissibility, the idea that human beings are allowed to be able to use whatever we want from the earth, however we want to be able to use it, until there is expressed evidence of damage occurring. Let us discuss this principle and explain it together, inshaAllah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a verse of the Quran which is mentioned at the beginning of the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter number 2, verse number 29. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. هو الذي خلق لكم ما في الأرض جميعا. He it is, Allah, who has created for you all that is on the earth. هو الذي, he is the one. خلق لكم, created for you all. ما في الأرض جميعا, all that is in the planet. ثم استوى إلى السماء فسواهن سبع سماوات وهو بكل شيء عليم. And Allah has applied His design to the heavens and fashioned them into 7 skies, and He alone has full knowledge of everything. This verse, and others, but primarily this verse, gives you and I the principle that human beings are allowed to be able to utilize whatever they want on the planet, however they want to be able to use it from the planet. Now, of course, we'll come to the detailed discussion, but start with this point and follow along the thought process. Allah has made everything for you and I. Allah has made the grass, He has made the animals, He has made the sun, He has made the oil, He has made the gold, He has made the diamonds. All of it has been made for the purpose of you and I to explore it, to exploit it, to maximize it, to use it for our potential and our benefit. Now, the scholars speak about this as a principle, and actually it is considered to be one of the most central principles in Islamic jurisprudence, that principally everything is allowed for us until proven otherwise. Our 6th Imam, Jaffer Ladak, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, is narrated to have said, كل شيء حلال حتى تعرفوا أنه حرام. Everything is considered for you halal until you can prove otherwise, until you can prove it is haram, not the other way around. So principally, we are able to utilize the planet for our human benefit. Ayatollah Hadi Ma'rifat, may Allah bless his soul, comments on this verse, Allah has created everything for you, in his tafsir, he says the following: this is amongst the foremost principles, isalat al-ibaha. Everything is mubah for you. This is amongst the foremost principles, that permission is given to mankind to make use and enjoy everything in nature, whatever is not prohibited or whatever is not being used to harass another from their rights is available for you to be able to use. Everything is permissible for you until you can prove otherwise. After this, Muqaddis Ardabili, may Allah grant him the highest station in Jannah, uses this verse in an interesting way, just to be able to show you how they use this isalat al-ibaha. Everything is permissible for you until proven otherwise. Muqaddis Ardabili says the following. He says, this verse, it indicates towards the permissibility of living anywhere on earth, traveling anywhere without restrictions until there is an evidence to state otherwise. You'll remember we mentioned previously this idea of visas, this idea of you only being able to live in one nation state, you not having freedom of movement, refugees not being able to say, I want to go wherever I want in the earth. This is against Islam, principally. Of course, in a time like now, when there is a pandemic, you cannot pass on or potentially contract a virus, and of course, your freedom of movement is curtailed. This makes sense. However, the principle is the whole world is available to the human being, and you have right to access it all. Now, Islam instructs believers to profit from the resources of the planet, and this adds weight to this verse that we have stated. Everything has been created for your disposal. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in chapter number 62, verse number 10, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, فَانْتَشِرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَابْتَغُوا مِنْ فَضْلِ اللَّهِ وَاذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. Disperse in the land and seek from the bounty of Allah, and remember Allah much, that you may become successful. So Allah says disperse in the land, in the world, and seek His bounty. So again, the principle is seeking. This principle is exploration. The principle is to be able to dig and to mine and to explore everything that the human being wants. Chapter number 67, verse number 15, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the following, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, هُوَ الَّذِي جَعَلَ لَكُمُ الْأَرْضَ ذَلُولًا فَامْشُوا فِي مَنَاكِبِهَا وَكُلُوا مِنْ رِزْقِهِ وَإِلَيْهِ النُّشُورُ. It is He who tamed the earth for you. So travel in its regions and consume of its provision. Unto Allah will you be resurrected. So again, the principle is making use of the human resources that are available to you. Now, of course, this at one point makes sense, doesn't it? That the earth should be there for you and I to maximize from, until we realize harm is coming about to the planet. I should be able to use the earth, farm on its lands, utilize its animals, until I can say, well, harm is happening, now I will stop. You might find it very interesting that this speaks and reflects very much to the discussion of capitalism that we had previously, that we should be able to utilize our resources. We should be able to take benefit from everything until we can see that there is a harm in it. This is what is known as the principle of ibaha. Everything is mubah until proven otherwise. Now, Ayatollah Jawadi Amoli concurs, and he explains the following. The Quran exhorts humankind to make good use of natural resources. The fulfillment of this divine order involves mining, agriculture, and generally any productive form of benefit from raw material available in nature. So, based on the statement of Ayatollah Hadi Ma'rifat, Muqaddis Ardebeli and Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli, we can probably extrapolate three things here. Number one, everything is permissible for us to use, even in its essential state. Even if we want to mine for oil, we can utilize it. We don't need to say we have to wait for it to change and then we can use it. No, we can use whatever initial form this thing is in. The verse says, خَلَقَ لَكُمْ. We have created for you all, not individually, lak. Lakum, all of you. Now the fact that the Quran says that we have created this whole world for all of you, it indicates all have access and equal share to the planet, and so the benefit and the harm must also be equalized as well. The third thing we can glean from the opinions of these great scholars, may Allah bless them, is that the usage of the earth is allowed until an evidence says otherwise. Now here we're going to make a challenge. We're probably going to make two challenges to this idea. The idea that Isalat al-Ibaha is the starting point for human usage of the planet can definitely be challenged here. And we need to be able to think about whether this principle is correctly being applied to environmental protections or not. Number one, in regards to how our dear scholars, may Allah bless them, are using this principle based on what we've explained, is that the evidence that everything is available for our usage until proven otherwise is actually narrower than, or the claim is actually narrower than the evidence itself. The claim that we are able to utilize everything from this earth until we get such a point of damaging the earth is actually narrower than the evidence itself. Who says that we have the freedom to be able to do this without condition? Who says that we're able to utilize and we have permissibility of the planet until the end of its exploitation? Actually here, we need to be able to really reflect on this matter and think about this deeply. Let's provide a simple example for you and I to reflect on. Let us say that there is a tree that is standing in front of us. We don't know whose owner it is. It's available for us. The tree is there. And from the tree would produce fruit. Let's say this is an apple tree. And so the tree produces an apple fruit. And of course it will have many, many fruit. The principle of ibaha, the principle that it is free for me to be able to utilize this tree when I want and however I want, until harm comes to it, or harm comes to me, or until damage comes to the planet, suggests I can use this tree however I want until harm is evidenced. Correct or not? Is this making sense? As we stated, the principle is everything is available for me to be able to use until I can prove otherwise. So the tree is there, the apples are there, and I'm allowed to be able to use this tree however I want. Now, one person will come along and say, I want to pluck one apple from the tree, and I'm going to eat it, and I'm going to benefit from this apple. Another person using Isalat al-Ibaha, the principle that I can just use anything how I want until otherwise, says, I'm not just going to take one apple, I'm going to take all the apples from the tree. And now that I've taken all the apples from the tree, all 100 are now in my basket, the second person that comes along, he or she will not have access to those apples at all. All the apples are going to be gone. But it's fine because God gave me permission to be able to use this tree however I wanted to be able to use it. In your opinions, which one is correct? Am I allowed to take one apple? Yes. Am I allowed to take all 100 apples such that when the rest of you walk past and also want to use this tree, are you able to not use it? No, that wouldn't be fair on you. It wouldn't be in line with the verse. خَلَقَ لَكُمْ مَا فِي الْأَرْضِ جَمِيعًا. We have made for you all what is in the earth. If I take all 100 apples, you are all left with 0 apples. A third person comes along and says, I don't want the apples. You know what? I don't like the look of this tree. I'm going to get an axe, and he chops it down. So no longer does the tree even live. Tree is gone. The principle of ibaha says, I can cut down this tree because I'm allowed to do whatever I want to the planet until we prove harm. Now a person will say, where's the harm? I cut down the tree, but so what? There's no actual harm to the people. I want to use this tree. I want to make it into fire for logs. I want to be able to make it into logs for fire. I want to be able to shape it so it becomes a chair, so it becomes a nice bookshelf, and so on and so on. Why can't I use the wood? What you can see here is that there is a person who wishes to be able to use a part, there's a person who wishes to be able to use all, and then there's a person who wishes to destroy altogether. Actually, we can challenge this idea that everything is available for us to be able to use. Why? Because I'm not the owner of that tree. You know who is the owner? Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. There is a principle in Islam which is called at-tasarruf fi mal al-ghayr bi-idhni malik ghasbun, that I cannot accrue the benefits of something whilst that thing belongs to someone else. I can't take something that belongs to you and then claim the benefits even though that item doesn't belong to me. I can't take, I don't know, a cow and milk it, your cow, and milk it if you have cows. I can't take your belonging and then say, well, it's now in my possession, I'll use it, and I get to benefit from its milk. That would be considered ghasb. It would be considered usurpation. This tree belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost. Secondly, it belongs to all of us in the planet, and therefore it is not permissible to use it until harm comes. Actually, this principle needs to be challenged. Actually, we are not allowed to use anything in a way that becomes wasteful. We're not permitted to use something in a way in which actually we lose the access to it ongoing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Ya Bani Adam, khudhu zinatakum inda kulli masjid, wa kulu, washrabu, wa la tusrifu, innahu la yuhibbul musrifin. O children of Adam, adorn yourselves at every place where you will worship Allah. Consume, eat and drink, but do not waste. Verily Allah does not love the wasteful. So either we say everything is available for me to be able to use, or we say actually everything has an owner. Everything has to be used in accordance with other principles of not being wasted, not being exploited. And so Isalatul Ibaha here may not actually apply. The second way we might deal with this actually is to return back to the maqasid al-sharia. We stated that the maqasid prejudices, protects certain things, doesn't it? We stated those verses, it protects the mountains. Why? Because the mountains are stabilizers for the earth. It protects the trees because the trees breathe in the carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen for you and I. It's the lungs of the planet. We stated that the rivers and the oceans, they bring in fresh water for you and I and take out those things which are unclean. We have to protect these things. Therefore, if we know the starting point from the maqasid which governs the fiqh is that these things need to be protected in the world, we can no longer apply the principle of ibaha to these matters Because if we wish to be able to use them, we have to use them in accordance with protection, conservation, equal distribution, and not use them until their resource is depleted such that the tree is no longer available for anyone to be able to use. This is a very important fiqhi discussion that is at the center of the debate of environmental protection. So now when it comes to this particular question of how we use these resources in the planet, what we're actually stating is that we don't use them until harm comes about, until poisoning happens, until displacement occurs, until we need to say, now we put in new regulations to protect endangered species, endangered places, and so on. Actually, we need to think about it from the other perspective. That we actually state that some things are protected from the outset, not to be utilized in the wrong way. We also need to be able to state that the planet, which is already now under threat, actually, because we know harm is being done to the planet, we can no longer utilize these things the way in which we were. And that now the maqasid exists. The maqasid seeks to protect these things in the ecology, and actually they are firstly protected, and we do not have a principle to utilize these matters whatever extent we want to be able to use them. This is the first fiqhi discussion, and as I said, this is just explorative with you. This is just introducing these points, and inshallah we will discuss them more in the nights to come. The second discussion, the second fiqhi principle is what is known as la dharar wa la dhirar. No harm, no harming. Islam does not occasion harm. Islam doesn't allow harm to come to you, nor does it allow for you to bring harm to others. Now, what's the meaning of harm here? Linguists have differed in the meaning of harm, but they speak about it in a number of ways. They say we have to think about removing any severity in life. We have to protect ourselves from losing our wealth and losing our honor. All of these are different ways of understanding we need to protect ourselves from harm. Ayatollah Sayyid Fadil Milani, may Allah grant him a long life, explains how harm must be either removed altogether or harm must be reduced wherever possible. He says the following: the first thing we need to do is harm must be removed entirely where possible. If we're unable to remove harm entirely, then wherever necessary, decisions that occasion the least amount of harm need to be given priority over decisions which occasion a greater amount of harm. Thirdly, wherever necessary, decisions that harm a few number of individuals are to be given priority over decisions that harm the whole of society. As a simple example with COVID-19, we need to remove harm, don't we? So what do? We stop our freedom of movement. Now, of course, some people still have to have freedom of movement. Those are the doctors, those are the nurses, those are the bus drivers, those are the people who are in essential jobs, essential key workers. So we remove harm, but wherever we possibly can. We realize that sometimes there are people who are going to be in harm's way. However, wherever potentially possible, we must remove harm. This makes sense to all of us. Now, Ayatollah Sayyid Fadil Milani talks about how harm must be reduced or removed when there is the harm potentially reaching the public en masse, widespread harm. As an example, COVID-19. He gives an example. Think about this example. He says, for example, if there is a cold winter, think about in some of our home countries. He says if there's a cold winter and the only provisions for ghusl is an outside facility with cold water, and people would be using this cold water, the likelihood is because of these outdoor showers in winter, people would become ill. Correct? he gives the example. He says, at this point, because you need to protect people from harm, and en masse people would become ill, he says, at this point, wudu would be dropped and tayammum would be made permissible. This isn't a controversial point. You might think, whoa, I've never heard this before. These are things that are all standard fiqh points that I'm raising with no debate on them. A person or people who are at risk for harm has to be reduced, if possible removed altogether. And so a secondary ruling is allowed. Yes, you still have to be ritually pure, but you don't need ghusl, you can do your wudu. You don't need wudu, you can do your tayammum. And this shows us how reducing harm needs to occur. Now think about this, brothers and sisters. Very interesting issue that is raised in front of us. If it is wajib for us to remove harm, if it is wajib for us to reduce harm wherever we cannot remove harm, and we can see that even when it comes to religious rulings like ghusl and wudu and tayammum, these can actually be shifted in order to protect harm from people en masse. What about those environmental issues that we are doing that cause harm to the planet? Harm to human society? The potential of 7.8 billion people. Let's pick one. As I said, we're only having an explorative discussion, and we will continue this inshallah as we build the nights. What about the harm of eating meat at the moment? Methane gas, which is produced from industrial farming animals, is the single biggest contributor to greenhouse gases according to scientific consensus. The single biggest reason for global warming, greenhouse gases, partially the destruction of the planet, is the meat that we are eating and the amount that we are consuming because of the methane gases that are produced from this. So if it is prohibited for us to cause harm, and meat consumption is the single biggest harmful action to the planet right now, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "La dharar wa la dirar," Islam is not permitted to occasion harm. What happens to mine and your consumption of meat, which is a produce of the biggest contributing factor to harm of the planet? At the moment, all the animals that are being raised at an industrial level, hormones are pumped into them, steroids, artificial chemicals, all of which run off into the ecosystem. Now traditionally, our Maraja al-Kiram, may Allah bless them, have not applied the issue of qa'idat dharar, the principle of not allowing harm, to the environment. Why? Because they only extended it to the protection of human beings, not extending it to protection of the planet, protection of living beings. The reality is, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam stated Islam is prohibited from causing harm, he meant it to all beings across the planet. Even if there was a traditional scholar that said that it only extends to human beings, then the reality is, as we've been stating, by virtue of these greenhouse gases, we are not only harming the planet, we are also going to be harming the very future of human beings as well, which means it kills indiscriminately, it destroys indiscriminately the planet and the human beings. So whether you believe you are prohibited from harming the planet or only us as human beings, either way, this principle la dharar wa la dirar extends to us at this moment. Now, of course, I'm not giving fatwa to say don't eat meat, and I'm not saying do eat meat. What I'm exploring with you is how the fiqh, contemporary issues, would be resolved or challenged by the fiqh. Because you and I are going to have these conversations in these coming nights. This is the second principle that deals with this matter. The last issue that we can raise, again, just to introduce it tonight, before we go into it in more details in the coming nights, is another principle in fiqh. We're having a very fiqhy discussion tonight. Another fiqhy discussion, or another fiqhy principle, is what is known as qa'idat muhim versus aham. Muhim is that which is important. Aham is that which is most important. Sometimes we have two things that clash with each other. Do you remember yesterday I mentioned to you, sometimes we have the issue of, I need to have freedom, but I also need the government to protect me. So you have two principles. Now when they clash, sometimes the way in which we deal with this clash is we resort to this principle, qa'idat al-muhim wal-aham. What is important versus what is more important. And of course, we will always choose that which is more important. So now have a look at some of these issues that end up being raised in regards to this fiqhi principle and the challenge that is before us. We have a need of travel, but we have a need of reducing carbon emissions. Qa'idat al-muhim wal-aham, what is important versus most important, would now come into play. What happens when it's non-essential travel, like a holiday, versus essential travel, like for livelihood, or spiritual travel, such as for Hajj and Ziyarah? What happens when my travel contributes to the destruction of the planet versus the need to reduce carbon emissions? What happens when we have the need of production? We need to be able to look after the needs, the basic needs of life. But when we produce these things, it actually produces things that harms the planets. For example, plastics. What about our enjoyment of meat and the need to reduce methane? These all clash with each other, and all of these come in the fiqhi principle of qa'idat al-muhim versus al-aham, that which is important versus that which is most important. Now, of course, the problem we have here is what is aham for one person will be muhim for another person. That which is most important to you may not be important to me, and what is most important to me may not be important to you, which means it's going to be relative to our understanding, relative to our levels of education, relative to the experience that we're having. For example, if right now you are living in a part of the world that is being consumed with smog, like in China, or for example in India, the way in which you would consider what is aham, most important, will be very different to someone, for example, who's living in Iceland, which may not be experiencing the same thing because of the greenery that is out there. It might not be aham for them, it might be muhim, and so on. So immediately we are at loggerheads. How does a fiqh deal with these matters when we see that the very actions we are doing, for one person, you will say, going on Hajj is most important for you. For another person, they will say, but it cannot be done at the expense of the planet. Can you see what the faqih has to deal with today? Qa'idat al-muhim versus al-aham might be one of those issues that we use to resolve this challenge. Now here, what we've done tonight is a very important, detailed, difficult discussion for you and I to wrap our heads round. What we've stated is that Islam has what is known as the maqasid al-sharia, the goals of Islam, that which it seeks to protect. And then we've stated that traditionally we have three fiqhi principles that will challenge the way in which we consume and think about the matters of the environment. The first one was isalat al-ibaha, the principle that everything is mubah for us to be able to use until we can evidence that harm is being done. Number one. Number two, the principle that Islam does not even permit harm in the first place. Well, what happens when we are doing harm to the planet? How do we resolve the matter? And thirdly, what happens when you and I wish to be able to travel? But sometimes we know that our travel is essential, sometimes it's non-essential. If the planet is being destroyed through our travel, how does the fiqh respond to these matters? We're going to conclude here because it's been a heavy discussion and we've come to our time. However, to give you a feel of where we're going in tomorrow night's discussion, we're now going to turn to the issues of science. And we're going to ask, how does Islam weigh up the texts versus the science? When does it give license for the science to come first? When does the science dictate the fiqh? And we will particularly be looking at the opinions of Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Abu Qasim al-Khu'i, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh, and also His Eminence Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Hussein Fadlullah, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh, to explore when science may dictate the fiqh that we have and the way in which we traverse the issues of Isadat al-Ibaha, Qa'idat la dharar wa la dirar, and Qa'idat al-Muhim versus Aham. And inshallah, once we bring these three issues together, the maqasid, the fiqh, and the science, we will have a really interesting, deep way to be able to manage and navigate the challenges of environmental protection that is so urgently required in our community discourse. Inshallah, tonight has been of help to you. I look forward to joining you again, inshallah, tomorrow night. Walhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu